sure you don't walk into the light here.
She knows she's going to move the light. That's what she said.
We're going to do live on election night, too. 1 minute. Quiet on set. Five seconds. Audio time. 30 seconds, we're live.
It's supposed to be coming.
15 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6.
Welcome. I'm Rosaline Zish. Tonight's forum is for candidates for Sheriff and County Supervisor, presented by Create TV San Jose and Valley Politics, and co-sponsored by the League of Women Voters of San Jose, Santa Clara. The League is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization of women and men established to promote political responsibility through informed, active participation in government. The League does not support, oppose, or evaluate political candidates or parties. We do, after careful study, take positions on issues. Our goal is to impart information to you, the voter, in accordance with our belief that a democracy and a democratic government depend upon the informed and active participation of its citizens. The questions tonight have been screened and prioritized by League members. For tonight's forum, the candidates will have 1 minute to respond to each question. They will also each have a 1-minute wild card to use at any time, and we'll have a lightning round of short answer questions. All this tonight on Valley Politics Live.
Thank you, Rosaline, and welcome to our audience here in the studio. This is a first for Valley Politics. We're pleased and excited to have you here, but please hold your applause until the end of our time with each set of candidates. Now let's welcome the candidates for Santa Clara County Supervisor, District 4, School Trustee Susan Ellenberg and San Jose City Councilman Don Rocha. Welcome, candidates.
Thank you.
Let's get right to the questions. We start with you, Susan. What specific functions or services of the county have motivated you to run for this office?
I think that one of the primary concerns that I've had as a school board member has been the partnership with schooling services. County government is in a position to support our students by providing mental and behavioral health care, access to dental services, well child checkups, as well as a wide variety of learning supplements. And it's what I have seen as a school board member in terms of the number of students we have who are unstably housed, who have inadequate access to nutrition, health care, no early childhood educational opportunities, a whole litany of challenges that we can't address at the school board level. Those are all the levers that are at the county. And I believe that strong partnerships between county government and schools will improve student performance, which will lead to a better prepared workforce.
Don, what about you?
Well, for me, one of the great opportunities about this position is going to afford me the ability to work on some issues that I've worked on since I've been on the city council. It's been 7, almost 8 years now, and prior to that, 2 years on the school board. But a lot of the issues that I've heard as I've walked in door to door, and I've heard prioritizing for folks around housing affordability and homelessness, traffic growth, which gives me an opportunity to talk about regional planning, and then public safety. It's the work that I've been doing on the city council, so it really affords me to continue the work that I've already done and even expand it on a greater scale at the county.
Thank you. We start with you on the next question. County District 4 encompasses much of San Jose, as you well know, including the Rose Garden, Burbank, West San Jose, Willow Glen, Cambrian neighborhoods, plus Campbell and Santa Clara. What are you hearing from the residents when you're out there talking to them? What are their concerns? How are you going to address those concerns?
Well, they're pretty typical ones that you would have expected. There are some differences between cities, but I'll go back to those three issues that I talked about. And oftentimes for folks, they're really concerned about housing affordability and the homeless issue. And then you can talk about traffic and growth. And in some areas, such as Santa Clara or West San Jose, the traffic and growth issue is a bit more pronounced than it would be in, say, Willow Glen or Cambrian. And then again, lastly, public safety. And oftentimes that issue arises more on the San Jose side. Campbell and Santa Clara seem to be pretty well served on their public safety side, but it's still a priority for them. So that's really what I've been hearing at the doors. And it's, again, as I mentioned, from my experience on the City Council, it's not a surprise that those issues are important to folks, which I think provides me a really good opportunity to continue the great work I've already done.
Susan, what about you? What are you hearing?
I'm hearing some similarities. Certainly, the cost of housing is high on folks' list, and some are talking about it from the perspective of whether their children will be able to afford to live here. Others are talking about concerns with the number of people that they find in their neighborhoods who are homeless or that they encounter on their way to or from work or driving along the freeways. I'm also hearing, particularly from the folks in the unincorporated pockets of District 4, that they're very interested in continuing the strong relationship that both communities have built with Supervisor Ken Yeager, and wanting to make sure that as a supervisor, I would continue that same level of access and engagement. Unlike the folks in San Jose and Campbell and Santa Clara, they don't have city council members that represent them, and I think it's a very important piece of this role to make sure that we're attuned to the different issues that come up in every neighborhood.
Susan, we come back to you for the next question. So the county owns a lot of land that could be developed for various purposes, including Reed Hillview Airport, the old San Jose City Hall and Hospital sites, and the fairgrounds. What do you think should be done with these properties?
So I've already written about some of these properties. I think that the county needs to set the example. We've got the Measure A dollars, which provides tremendous leverage for county government to be able to fund affordable housing, and the next step is to step up and say yes on our property. The fairgrounds has had a number of development proposals brought before the board over the last 15 or 20 years. None of them have gone forward. The old City Hall is something that I did write about and encouraged the current Board of Supervisors to think about even short-term housing on that space while they're looking at a bigger, more comprehensive long-term plan. And Reed Hillview Airport, I have heard a tremendous amount about, both from residents in the neighborhood who feel that there would be a much higher use for that property, and airport commissioners and local pilots who are absolutely as passionate that it's a central asset to our community.
Don, county property.
Well, I don't want to step out and suggest that I know what's best in terms of existing land assets that the county has without going through a process. There's a couple processes. One is identifying which ones may or may not be surplus. There's also the community process, and there are residents that often live around those assets that you talked about, and you have to start there first before any elected official suggested what we should or shouldn't do with it. But we are in a housing crisis, and everybody knows it. So for me, identifying one particular site that you listed, from the hospital to the airport to the fairgrounds, I think the fairgrounds is the most obvious. It's an underutilized piece for sure. But again, I'll go back to what I said earlier. There is a community process, and there are a lot of stakeholders, ones that have current uses on the site and then also surrounding uses. So we want to make sure we go through a community public process. But I'll go back to the crisis part. We don't have a heck of a lot of time, and the county, with all due respect, has been sitting on this asset for quite some time. So I would like to see us move a lot quicker without trying to disparage the current board. But for me, that would be an urgent item for my priority.
Next question is related. The county's land use authority is restricted to unincorporated areas, which is areas not in any city. But cities have the authority to make land use decisions, such as zoning for housing. So what should the county's role be in addressing our regional housing crisis?
I'll answer with the question, a regional role. And I've suggested that I think it was back in the 70s, there was a county land use commission of sorts. It was a regional planning body.
Yeah.
And they talked more about regional uses such as water treatment plant, et cetera. But I would like to call that back into order, and that would include, as I understand it, a council member from every city and a planning commissioner from every city. And having a conversation at the table about regional planning issues and needs, whether it's job development or housing development. Not having a conversation and not sitting down with folks, I think, is what we see in terms of the problems of everybody working in silos. One city says, you're not doing enough housing. Another city says, you're not doing enough job development, which is pretty rare. And they're just shooting across the bow, and no one's really having a conversation. It's a lot harder to sit down in front of somebody, and when they say, look, we need you to step up on the housing side, will you? And you've got a bunch of your fellow colleagues who are council members from other cities. You've got to go back to your council and share with your mayor and council. They're asking us to step up, and you've got to come up back with an answer.
Thank you. Susan?
Another primary responsibility of the county, which seems often to be in conflict with the goal of adding more housing, is the county government is really a steward of open space as well. And what I would not like to see is our county starting to engage in the business of becoming developers. I think that what our county absolutely does not need is greater urban sprawl, and it should be the development, I believe, should be largely happening within the cities, with the small exceptions of some of the unincorporated pockets that are already in highly urbanized areas. But I would really push back strongly against the county becoming a developer. The focus should be on services and not try to repeat the services that cities are engaging in terms of developing infrastructure and developments and entitlements.
Okay, are you ready for your lightning round? Short answers, 1 word, 2 words. Start with Susan. Which current supervisor do you most admire? Oh, we're putting you on the spot.
You are. It's a good group. I would say Josemidian.
Josemidian. Don?
Ken,
Yeager.
kill me if I didn't say that.
Don, what's your favorite county park?
Sanborn.
Sanborn.
Vasona.
Susan, Mercury, Metro, or NBC Bay Area? See, these aren't easy questions.
You're right. All of the above. A bit of a news junkie.
Don?
Can I go none of the above?
Yes. Don, 49ers or Earthquakes? They both play in your district.
Earthquakes.
49ers.
Susan, do you support or oppose Proposition 6, the repeal of the increase in the state gas tax?
I am not in support of repealing the gas tax.
Right.
Oppose.
Oppose. And Don, do you support or oppose Measure A? That's the extension of the county's 1/8 cent sales tax.
I support it.
I
Susan.
support that as well.
Susan, should the county buy O'Connor Hospital?
Yes.
Yes.
Don, this is a really hard one. San Jose State University or Santa Clara University?
Oh, jeez. I'll just go with San Jose State.
Good answer.
Yeah.
Susan.
I'm going to call out our public university as well.
Okay. Susan, supervisors all serve on multiple regional agencies. Which would be your preference?
I'm particularly interested in serving on the LAFCO board. I've been talking about that in forums really since the very beginning, the Local Agency Formation Commission. I think in connection with my earlier comments about open space stewardship, LAFCO is really, I think, the last great defender locally of the open space.
Oh, wait a minute. This is short answers.
Oh, it is?
You slipped that by me. Don, you get a little bit longer
I'm
answer.
okay. Does
I apologize. I thought we were
sorry.
done with the lightning
No, I'm
round.
sorry.
That was good. Does the VTA qualify, or are you talking more?
Yeah,
about
VTA qualifies. Valley Transit.
Yes, transportation is one of my strong interests.
Okay. Okay, Don, we're back to you with the 1-minute answers. So Santa Clara County has joined or led lawsuits against President Trump's attempt to terminate the DACA program, to override local protections of LGBTQ people, to cut funding for sanctuary counties, and repeal net neutrality. Do you support this resistance? Should the county do more?
I support it 100%, and my hat's off to the current board for their leadership on these issues. You know, there's a lot of individuals who, especially the ones that you mentioned, that may not have representation either in elected office or in terms of voter representation. And for the board to step up and stand up to the national, to the White House on these issues, I am in full support, and I wouldn't suggest they do anything other than what they've been doing. They've been an excellent job.
Susan?
I also support the lawsuits, but with perhaps a bit more caution. I want to make sure that that in our zeal to counter the Trump administration, which very oftentimes is an admirable goal, that we don't take our eye off of the residents that are in our county and the services that we are obligated to be providing here. And the funding that we need to spend here, I'm very concerned about dollars that are spent externally outside of the county that don't directly impact our residents.
Okay, Susan, the sheriff is an independently elected countywide officer, but the Board of Supervisor votes on the sheriff's budget and on other policy matters. How involved do you think the board should be in managing the sheriff's office?
I think that incidents over the last couple of years demonstrate that we need more independent oversight in the sheriff's office, particularly with regard to oversight of corrections and what's happening in the jail. I'm not as concerned about overseeing the budget as I am about protecting people's human rights and dignity, and particularly concerned about people who enter the jail with mental or behavioral health illnesses and perhaps are not having all of their needs met.
Don?
Well, I think it should be very involved, but I also think it should be a partnership. I think any policy decisions that have to do with the sheriff's department or the jails really need to involve a conversation with our sheriff. Everybody needs to be at the table, and I don't know enough about whether or not those conversations had happened or not happened previously, which may have led to some of the instances that we are concerned about. But I think as far as the jail goes, I think the board and I think the sheriff would have to agree, given the population you're serving and the needs that surround that wraparound services, this isn't just about incarceration, this is about programs and diversions. So everybody has to be at the table. I wouldn't suggest one person lead. Everybody should be a partner.
Okay, Don, this is for you. Do you support the county's current policy of limited cooperation with the federal government regarding undocumented immigrants?
Yes.
Okay, that's it.
Lightning round.
We can make that lightning, yes.
Okay. Okay. So let's see. Susan, what the county does is so important in the lives of so many people, but the county's the level of government that people know the least about, as you're probably learning
Yes.
on the doorsteps, and seem to take the least interest in. Do you have any ideas about what we could do about that?
Absolutely, I do. And I'll tell you that you're right, that at the doors very often people don't know what county supervisors do, what I'm running to supervise. But mention the words $7 billion budget and you have people's attention immediately. So it's not hard to make county work very tangible very quickly, talking both about the scope of the budget and very tangible things that people can relate to: public health, public safety, human services for vulnerable communities. I think part of our job as supervisors should be to be very publicly engaged and to encourage more involvement with community members, and particularly I would like to see some partnerships with schools and students to learn more about what government does at every level, but particularly county government, because it does impact our residents so directly.
Don?
I'll use the city that I reside in as an example in terms of potential partnerships. And I think it goes back to that word as to how we can have more engagement or involvement or more awareness of our residents on the county services. When I do go to door, and as Susan mentioned, I often get that question of what does the county actually do? And it's a difficult question to answer in a very short time, because often these services are not ones that a typical middle-class suburbanite would use. Mm-hmm. So for me, it's about greater partnerships between the city and the county, whatever the issue may be. And the ones that I listed, I'll go back and repeat myself on public safety, regional planning, and then the housing issue. You know, really, there are opportunities for the city and county to work together. And for whatever reasons, political reasons, I think we don't need to get into, the county and the city of San Jose hasn't often worked together in a partnership role. I'd like to be the one that bridges that gap and have us talk more often, work more often together.
Okay, thank you. So the next one's for you. And it's about the services. The county provides many critical services. In your perspective, what works well? Where are there problems or issues you'd address as a county supervisor?
That's a tough question. Where does it work well? I think the county park system's fantastic.
Yes.
I'd say our health, Valley Med and the health services that we provide to this county is a crown jewel. They are a leader statewide in terms of the services they provide. Where can we do better is a very difficult question, and I'm going to go back to, again, repeat myself on the partnership opportunity and working more with our local cities on those regional issues from housing to transportation. I think that's probably where the gap is that I'd like to improve.
Okay. Susan, what do you think the county does well and what can it do better?
I think what the county is doing particularly well right now is addressing homelessness. I think that the Office of Supportive Housing and Destination Home have done a fantastic job in bringing together a tremendous number of organizations and interests around the urgency of providing housing to our most vulnerable residents. There are already 10 projects that are underway that will be able to serve residents that need permanent supportive housing by early 2019. And I see a tremendous amount of energy, skill, and expertise really moving that forward. A department where I think we need a tremendous amount of work is in the foster care system. The outcomes for kids who exit the foster care system are exceptionally poor. And I think that there is a lot of work that needs to be done there to look at how we're providing services, what partners are involved, and what radical changes may need to be made, particularly in light of changing current state laws.
Thank you. So Susan, again, what will you do on your first day as county supervisor?
Probably learn my way around. Move in and start scheduling lots of meetings, because as much as I've been working hard up to election day, there will be a tremendous amount of work to become immediately familiar with what is on the next agenda and who all of the players are and who's around that will help and teach and support me.
Don, day one.
For me, I look back at my experience on the city council, and one of the ones I found most valuable is when the city manager pulled together every department head in a conference room, and they introduced themselves. One, that was good to get familiar with the individuals who were actually doing the work, and they talked about their scope of work. That, for me, would be what I'd be asking of our county exec, is the opportunity to meet with each department head. I'm going to go even a step below that and talk about the employee groups. These are the frontline staff that do the work, and oftentimes the department head may not share all the issues that may exist within their particular department, good or bad, that the frontline folks are well aware of. So I'd like to do those two things, not my first day, but hopefully my first week.
Okay, my advice to both of you is hire great staff, but you'll probably do that before day
First day,
one.
I hope.
Yeah, so they're right there with you. So Don, last question. Besides focusing on issues for your constituents, you'll be making decisions affecting the county as a whole. What do you think are the most important challenges facing Santa Clara County, and how do you propose to address those challenges?
I think the housing issue is the first and foremost. And what's really, again, I'll go back to the progressive board we've had and the great accomplishments they've made. Measure A and getting that across the goal line. It's almost $1 billion. $1 billion that residents agreed to tax themselves for to provide housing for folks other than themselves. It's unheard of. So for me, that is the number one priority for a board member in terms of ensuring that those dollars and those tax dollars are spent effectively and efficiently, but also in the right place. I want to be at the table on that particular issue. And then the homeless, to me, they go hand in hand. It's I think a significant amount of the population on the homeless side is a result of the housing affordability issue here. So hopefully helping those two issues from different angles will make a dent in this tragic housing crisis we have here.
Susan?
Of my top three priorities, the first one is absolutely addressing the root causes of chronic homelessness. And I think that entails really at least a four-pronged approach, focusing on making sure that permanent supportive housing is coming online quickly, and that both the permanent and the supportive piece are met. We need to have income streams to keep these new developments operational, and we need to have on-site services to meet the needs of vulnerable community members. We also need to be looking more closely at mental and behavioral health services. Our needs being met of our folks who are experiencing homeless. How do we expand and better target the services? The third prong is looking at what is happening when people are coming out of our criminal justice system. Do people have access to opportunities to work, to places to live, essentially options other than recidivism? And the fourth place, going back to foster care system, that's a real touch point for likely homelessness as well, kids that are transitioning out of the foster care system. Looking at all four of those in connection with homelessness, I think, is crucial.
Okay, thank you. So we're almost out of time. You haven't played your wild card, so Don, would you like to play your wild card for a 1-minute closing?
I'll just thank you and the folks here and also the live audience that's been very quiet and polite for including me in this. I'm very excited about this opportunity to be a Board of Supervisor. The work and the scope that they do and the folks that they help are really the ones that need it most. And I can't imagine anything better for me continuing my path of public service than serving those communities that are most in need. So I want to thank you for having me here tonight, and I want to thank Susan for your participation as well.
Susan?
Thank you. I will return the graciousness to both of you and to our audience. Thank you so much. And I would also like to add that the work that I've been engaged in as a school board member, as a community advocate, as part of the Children's Vision Council, and as a commissioner on the County Commission for the Status of Women has been very directly targeted on our community's most vulnerable members. For me, moving to the Board of Supervisors allows me to continue to work on behalf of the same population with a larger platform, frankly, and more tools to be able to do more good. I've talked about my interest in addressing the root causes of chronic homelessness. Mental and behavioral health care as a more comprehensive system is an area that I'm really looking forward to working in, as well as early childhood, high quality care, and education. And I'm also looking forward to getting to work, frankly. We've been talking about this and campaigning for a very long time, and I am more than ready to do less talking and more working.
Our time with these candidates is up, I'm afraid. So thank you, Susan Ellenberg and Don Rocha.
Thank you.
Thanks for running. It's not an easy thing to do. It's a sacrifice to you and your families, and just know that your candidacies are appreciated. So we'll be back with more of our live candidate forum right after this. Welcome. I'm Terry Christensen, and this is Valley Politics.
Really looking at our position, the position of San Jose, Silicon Valley in the world.
To expand their knowledge of the community.
I'm a pretty bipartisan guy.
With long-time roots in the community.
We're here to raise awareness.
It's a very thoughtful community.
What we need to do more than anything is engage local residents.
Absolutely.
I'm very grateful of the effort because that changed something negative into positive. Everything we did was new.
We are, as a group, responsible for choosing that material.
So that we could talk about the surrounding areas.
You're looking at an economy that's an economic engine in the world.
Makes people feel really good and excited.
And really, this was something that could be applicable to the entire region.
I agree with you.
You know, Terry, you're a historian too. You know, you look at the long scope of history. I like to think it bends toward good things, and you know, hopefully that'll be continuing what we see in San Jose.
I'm Terry Christensen, and this is Valley Politics. Welcome back. I'm Terry Christensen. Welcome back. I'm Terry Christensen, and this is Valley Politics Live. Joining us now are the candidates for Santa Clara County Sheriff, Lori Smith and John Hirakawa. Welcome, both candidates. As a reminder, you'll have 1 minute to respond to each question, and you'll also have 1 minute wild card to use at any time. Before we start, just for background, the sheriff provides public safety services to portions of the county that are not part of any city and, by contract, in some smaller cities. The sheriff's also responsible for the county jail with an inmate population of around 3,600, and the office employs 2,000 people plus and has a budget of over $400 million. We begin our questioning with Sheriff Lori Smith. Lori, what are the most important challenges facing the Santa Clara County Office of Sheriff, and how do you propose to address those challenges?
So some of the things that I think are very, very important is the mental health that we deal with on the streets. And we are proposing doing mobile mental health, teaming a clinician with a deputy. We also need to safeguard our children, not only in the schools for school safety, but also keeping kids out of gangs, off drugs, and out of crime. And I'm a very, very strong advocate for victims and services for victims and directed enforcement that focuses on women's issues, domestic violence, and there's a lot of things that we're doing. I believe that in the Sheriff's Office, we really need to protect our community, not only with crime prevention, but also directed enforcement on a lot of the crimes that we're seeing in some of the cities. But the areas that we serve are some of the safest cities in California, and Santa Clara County is also a very safe county. We're very fortunate that we live in this area.
John Hirakawa, challenges and how to address them.
Thank you very much for having me. The challenges are keeping the community trust and the transparency of the office and doing the reforms that are necessary both on the enforcement side and on the custody side. And that requires a leader who has the ethical standards and leads by example for the rank and file of men and women who serve and keep our communities safe. And so those are the issues that need to be tackled in the Sheriff's Office in order to keep the community engagement, and conversing with them and groups to make sure that we know exactly how they're feeling and what the viable solutions can be to keep them safe in our community.
John, we'll start with you for our next question. As sheriff, you're independently elected, but the Board of Supervisors votes on your budget and some policy issues. So who's really in charge?
Who's really in charge? The sheriff is operating the jails in regards to the jail budget. On the enforcement side, it's the sheriff. But there needs to be more collaboration and communication between the board and the Sheriff's Office. I'm for full transparency. When you have a 20-year incumbent who's been working in this job for 2 decades and tells the community that she's been on budget or under budget since she's been sheriff, and then the board finds out that that's not true, that's not being transparent. And for me, it's that communication with the board and explaining why there may be overages or should be aware of what's going on in her own department.
Lori Smith, relationship between the Board of Supervisors and the Sheriff.
Well, I think that being independently elected really provides a great amount of autonomy to the sheriff to make decisions on what we think is best in the service of the community in crime prevention, crime detection, and directed enforcement. And so, but the Board of Supervisors does approve our budget, and we want to make sure that we're always very cautious with the dollar amount, with the public money and how it's expended. My opponent made a statement about being over budget, and we have spent a lot of money on jail reforms, exactly what we should have done, with full knowledge of the county executive and the Board of Supervisors. And the snapshot that they took in that report wasn't shared with the county executive or the sheriff. There were no questions, so we're providing a rebuttal to that. But I'm very fiscally conservative in looking at how we spend the public's money.
Okay, Lori, this is for you. And you alluded to this in your opening answer. A lot of people who are mentally ill seem to end up in jail instead of some form of treatment, which surely makes your job more difficult. What can we do about this?
You know, first of all, I don't think that people with mental health issues belong in jail. Very often it's a minor crime like trespassing, sometimes an assault, and jail should not be the answer. I talked a little bit about mobile mental health. Teaming a deputy and a clinician to find the services for that person in lieu of jail or just the emergency room at Valley Medical Center. But I think there needs to be a larger look at mental health statewide. Mental hospitals were closed many, many years ago, and there's so many now that are in jail and in prisons that really don't belong there, but their crime is a result of mental health. It's something that we focused on, including urging the county to enact more treatment beds, which they have. We've reduced the number of mental health in the jail, but I think also addressing their needs on the street is really important to keep them out of jail in the first place. It's a collaborative effort with us, with mental health, and with all the police agencies, and it's something that we're talking about doing.
Thank you. John, mental health and incarceration.
So, The incumbent talks about mobile mental health. She's been talking about that since 2006, the election there. Nothing's ever happened. What I've done, though, has been to create these mental health teams in the jails, which includes a psychiatrist, a psychologist, a mental health counselor, a deputy, and some counselors who go around to the clients in the jail and provide those mental health services. The other thing that I did before I left was apply for a grant for wraparound service. So as mentally ill are released from the jail, there's some wraparound services that follow them. But the fact of the matter is, whether they're homeless, mentally ill, drug addictions, jail's not the answer. Cells are not the answer. There needs to be reforms in regards to the treatment of these people. They're not criminals. They have issues, in mental health issues, addiction, and they're homeless. So why are we treating it like a crime? We need to decriminalize these types of situations, and that's what John Hirakawa is about in regards to reforms.
Okay, thank you, John. Next question for you. Should the issue of racist and homophobic texts exchanged by sheriff's deputies in 2015 have been handled differently?
I think the case should have been handled a lot better. I think there were mistakes made from the incumbent. The incumbent had the authority and the opportunity to fire even the demotee, who's now in the center of the controversy, Don Morrissey, the president of the union of the DSA. That's the opportunity, and why didn't she? She hasn't answered that question. I do not tolerate any type of hate, racist speech. My families, during World War II, were incarcerated in the Japanese internment camps. They were stripped of their constitutional rights, and they lost their properties both in Southern California and their farms in Watsonville. They had to rebuild their lives. I do not tolerate that. As sheriff, I will not tolerate that. I'll make sure the policies and the procedures are followed, or they have to be reinforced. It's very naive for the incumbent to believe that it stopped there, that there are not other issues with other deputies in the jails or out in street patrol. Those issues need to be addressed, and you need a strong sheriff leading by example to do that.
Lori Smith.
Yes, it should have been handled differently. I came out originally saying that everybody involved in those horrible, horrible texts should be fired. I recused myself entirely from the investigation on the advice of counsel and Mr. Hirakawa, because the union presidents were raising issues of retaliation and animus, and they actually had filed a lawsuit against me. My mistake was trusting that my opponent would do the right thing. Let me read from the arbitrator's decision. Further, the record of evidence shows that the sheriff had no direct involvement in the disciplinary process resulting in the demotion. All the statements attributed to others regarding the sheriff purported dislike of grievance are unsubstantiated hearsay and therefore insufficient evidence to prove retaliation. He, on the other hand, testified that he thought the punishment was too severe, and that's on the record.
Are you ready for the lightning round?
Sure. Yes.
These are tough questions.
Okay.
And you can answer them with 1 or 2 words, so be brief.
Uh-oh.
Lori, we start with you. Do you support or oppose an independent monitor for the sheriff's office and jail operations?
Yes, I suggested it.
John?
Yes.
John, do you favor or oppose Measure A, the extension of the county's 1/8 cent sales tax?
I in support.
Support and sign the ballot argument.
Okay. Lori, earthquakes, sharks, or 49ers?
Oh.
Told you they were tough.
Sharks.
49ers.
John, do you favor or oppose the use of tasers in the jail?
Yes.
You favor?
Nope, do not favor.
You do not favor. You oppose?
Oppose.
Okay.
I favor for
You
safety.
favor use of tasers?
Yes.
Lori, would you rather be sheriff of Mayberry or Tombstone?
Oh, Tombstone. Old West.
Tough.
Mayberry, you don't have to carry guns.
John, do you support the recent reforms of the bail system statewide?
Yes.
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 Lori, you're a cop, so what's your favorite donut shop?
Oh, Manly's.
Well, I'm preferring 85 degrees right now.
Okay, John, we're back to the regular questions, so you can give whole 1-minute answers now again. Do you agree with the county's current policy of limited cooperation with the federal government regarding undocumented immigrants?
I agree with the county policy.
Yes.
You have a minute if you want.
Yes. I do agree with the county policy. I was part of the task force that put it together and actually did a lot of research into really what needed to be part of the policy. We do not cooperate. We do not accept detainer holds. I also signed the lawsuit denouncing Trump and his unconstitutional immigration policies. I signed a declaration on that lawsuit. I also was quoted by Attorney General Javier Becerra on my position on immigration, talking about the fact that in law enforcement, we don't do this alone. We do it with the community, and we've got to have the trust of all the community. Immigration policies such as the Trump administration and the unconstitutional policies are not only unconstitutional, but it does not promote well-being in any community and build trust with law enforcement.
John? Oh, wait a minute. You answered that question. Lori, so we stay with you. Recent news articles report budget problems in the Sheriff's Department, especially excessive overtime spending. Is that really happening? And if so, what should be done to fix it?
So I mentioned it real briefly in response to my opponent's comments. The report was seriously flawed. We're looking at it. I talked with the county exec's office, and they weren't even aware. No one had talked with them before it came out. There are a lot of problems, like when medical was over budget, they attributed it to us. If there were construction projects in the jail that were over budget, they attributed it to us. The other thing that we didn't anticipate is when my opponent retired, he not only left with his $250,000 salary, but another $250,000 payoff to him when he left. So those are unanticipated. We are doing reforms. We're spending very seriously on reforms. We believe in it. The county believes in it, and they really support what we're doing. And then we'll do a staffing analysis to determine the appropriate level once we institute all of the reforms.
John.
Fact of the matter is the county has spent, since the death of Michael Tyree, $350 million in the past 2.5 years. And I was watching the Sheriff's Office budget for the last 2 fiscal years, 2017 and 2018. And in those reports, in those fiscal year reports, they were, the Sheriff's offices went into tune and a deficit of tens of millions of dollars, total of 27. But there was no explanations from the sheriff or her staff in regards to why there were those deficits. She's now trying to use the excuse that it's jail reforms. But the fact of the matter is, she's in operational control. This is mismanagement on her part and her staff's part in regards to monitoring the overtime. You have to monitor it month by month, if not by pay period, to determine if you're going over or not. And those things weren't happening within that sheriff's office. Those over expenditures is just plainly mismanagement, and then there was no explanation over the last 2 fiscal years why. So now it's about jail reforms, but plenty of money's been spent on jail reforms.
John, start with you on this one. The public is concerned about violence in the jails and prisons. What can be done to reduce incidents of violence in our system?
Well, first you have to listen to the jail experts in regards. We spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on jail consultants, and guess who came up with the list of jail experts in regards to suicide prevention, medical health, mental health, dental, classification, overall American Disability Act consultants. That came from the concept papers from John Hirakawa before he retired, and those people were hired. If you don't listen to the experts and you do things operationally with disregard to the staff and to the inmate safety, now you've had in 2017 another murder in the jail, Mr. Edward Davis. You had numerous suicides in the jail, jumping against the advice of experts. But again, it's about who's operating the jails. It's not about how it's being spent. There's no doubt that the Board of Supervisors want the reforms in the jail. Now it's about how it's being done, when and how and what. And that's the operational authority under the sheriff. And those mistakes, and she's not listening to those experts.
Lori Smith.
So violence in the jail is a big problem. I think, first of all, our staff needs to be very, very well trained and have the right equipment. I support tasers. I think that can stop a lot of the violence, whether it's inmate on inmate or staff on staff. We are also implementing many, many programs internally that we hope will, according to the experts, will actually help with the issues of violence. We're finding, too, that the more out-of-cell time really has not increased the level of violence like was anticipated, and that was told to us. We have several experts in the jail right now, including Don Spector from the Prison Law Office, who was responsible for the state prison reform. And we are about to announce all of the reforms we're putting in place and everything that's going on. I think it'll be a real positive public announcement on what we're doing and taking into consideration the experts.
Okay, thank you. Sort of related question. Law enforcement personnel nationwide have dangerous and difficult jobs, but we seem to be hearing more and more about the use of deadly force, particularly as it impacts racial minorities and the mentally unfit. What steps would you take or have you taken to avoid misuse of deadly force?
You know, I think training is really, really a big component, and I mentioned a few minutes ago de-escalation techniques. We need to provide the very best training, the very best equipment, and we are doing a lot of mental health training, because I also think that not only is there an overrepresentation in minorities involved in officer-involved fatalities, but I also think that there is really a high propensity of people with mental health.
Yeah.
And so we really have to deal with that. How do we do policing now that we didn't when I was working patrol and working the street? How do we instill that information and knowledge? Because knowledge of how to deal with someone that has mental health issues really, really is a big step. We have trained a very, very big percentage of our department on the crisis intervention training. That's the 40 hours, and we do a lot of other training. We also have specialized units within the jail that deal with people with mental health.
Community trust is huge with me, as with the transparency and as with reforms. And so in regards to use of force and profiling, this is all within those topics. The Sheriff's Office has lacked in regards to how it's responded to the reforms of their use of force policy, specifically the deadly force. You have currently, I believe, an Assembly Bill 931 out there that's calling for there needs to be steps, reasonable steps that have to be articulated before using deadly force of firearm by law enforcement. These are reasonable things that have been going across the nation for the past 5 years, okay, in regards to all that the men and women in the office want to know is, what are the rules? What are the rules, and how are we going to apply those rules? You could do all the training and just check off boxes, but unless you actually have the policies in place to articulate what's expected of them. You had an incident in Saratoga with Mr. Craig, World War II veteran, a veteran who was armed.
John, you're endorsed by the Deputies Union, right?
Yes.
Lori, you're endorsed by the Corrections Officers Union, right?
Yes.
Well, one of you is going to be sheriff, and you're going to be managing both unions. So what kind of relationships can we expect?
Well,
starting with you, John, yes.
Well, obviously, I had about 78% of the Deputy Sheriff's Association that were behind me. On the corrections side, haven't been really given the notification other than there was less than 50% on the corrections side that voted to endorse Lori, and so the board took over and then endorsed Lori Smith. And so I believe they know me, especially during the death of Michael Tyree. Command staff had set up special squad meetings because they felt that they were not being included in regards to what was actually occurring. And so myself and Lori Smith were supposed to appear before them and explain to them what's going on and what the expectations were. After the first squad meeting, about the first one of 8, she left. Okay, and so that has been a bone of contention with them. There's been no communication with the current sheriff, with both unions or any unions, and so that's what they'll see from me.
Lori, relations with your staff unions.
So I not only have the endorsement of the Correctional Deputies Union, but I also have Service Employee Union supporting me. I have the County Managers Union supporting me, and the Central Labor Council supporting me. I have great relationships with unions. The Deputy Sheriff's Union, at the time he received the endorsement, was headed by the person that he's alluded to, the person who talked him into running for sheriff, Morrissey. He was the president of the union. Big step when he actually resigned from the union over this texting scandal. I think that the new leadership that comes in, and there will be an election in November. I think that the DSA will then be, the deputies union will then be led by quality people who do the right thing, that are not racist, homophobic, and misogynistic. That's a big hurt. I have fought with and held people accountable within the sheriff's office, and those that do not.
Lori?
Yes.
This is the last question.
Okay.
Because we're almost out of time. If you're elected, what's your top goal for the next 4 years?
You know, my top goal is continuing to do the good work we do. It's jail reforms and really seeing if there's better ways to provide service and quality service to the people, both in the jail and in enforcement. Just really providing quality service, cost-effective service, and service that is appreciated by the communities we serve. Keeping our crime rates low, but really focusing on property crimes. That seems to be a concern with a lot of the cities. And you mentioned that we serve small cities. Cupertino, Saratoga, and Los Altos Hills, 3 of the safest cities, they contract with the sheriff's office for service because we provide quality service, very cost-effective service, and they're some of the safest cities, and they're not necessarily small cities. So we're real proud to have the relationships that we have with our cities, with our court administration, and the other contracts that we have.
John Hirakawa, top goal for the next 4 years, should you win this election?
Making sure that especially our marginalized communities, especially immigrants, that they're not being targeted, that we're protecting their constitutional rights and their rights to live freely in our county. And that's my main concern for all residents in this county. Beyond that, you know, the public outreach, communication consistently, not just during the election time, with both community and groups in the rank and file. That's why I have the vast endorsements of the collaboration. We talk about collaboration. That's why I have 10 retired police chiefs from this county that believe that I will be more collaborative than the current incumbent. That's why I have 10 law enforcement organizations believe I'll be more collaborative in keeping you safe. That's why I also have with transparency. That's why I have blue ribbon commissioners, including retired Judge Ladors Cordell, who believes that I was more transparent, more cooperative, and more collaborative during the blue ribbons, they really study the issues in the jail. And so with that, without that community involvement, can't keep you safe.
So you haven't used your wild cards, but I'm going to give you a chance to do a 1-minute closing statement with your wild cards. John, we'll start with you, 1 minute.
John Hirakawa is about upholding the law, ensuring people's rights are not violated, and due process. That's why I'm running for sheriff. The current incumbent talks about how she recused herself based on the Don Morrissey case. That's not actually accurate. That misrepresents the facts. She has misrepresented the facts in regards to my involvement. That's why I've called for complete transparency, release all of the records, release all of the transcripts, because a lot of the misstatements and misrepresentations of how I was participating in this or not has been misrepresented by her supporters and her campaign. Recusing, that's why she self-admitted that they were having strategy sessions with paid public relations consultants and her staff about what the discipline should be and how to attack her political opponents, the unions. So does that sound like recusing? She had the opportunity and the authority to fire Don Morrissey, but she won't still explain why not.
Thank you, John. Lori Smith.
So this is going to sound like a rebuttal instead of a closing, but yes, I was advised to recuse myself. I'm glad I did because it didn't play into his arbitration on his discipline. You just can't say you're ethical. You actually have to be ethical. During this campaign, I've just seen so much dishonesty on the part of my opponent. If you read any of the newspaper accounts, you'll see we have the transcripts. The transcripts have been released. I think that the most comprehensive articles have been written by the Metro, and it really shows that the level of dishonesty, deceit, and when he wasn't telling a lie, and I'm going to just say it that directly, he either changed his story, blamed others, or made excuses. That's not what you need in a sheriff. You need someone that is totally upstanding, that will tell the truth every time, that will act ethically instead of just saying that you're ethical. And I would not elect anyone to any political office that wasn't honest, particularly sheriff.
Thank you, Lori Smith and John Shirakawa. We're out of time. Audience, you may now applaud. Next month, we'll be back with a live election night special. Meanwhile, you can catch up on our previous shows on our website, createtvsj.org, on YouTube by searching for CreateTV San Jose. And you can let us know what you think about our show and suggest future topics or guests by email at valleypolitics@createtvsj.org, on Twitter at @valley_politics, and by following us on Facebook. And now that's all, folks. Thank you for watching and participating in Valley Politics tonight. See you next time. Oh, don't forget to vote on or before November 6th.